Let me take you back to the 2000s, a pretty difficult decade to grow up in for teens in the West. Friend groups are pretty diverse and caring, however, and can work their way through any crisis differently from family. When one Chinese North American tween starts turning into a giant red mythical creature, which runs in the family, they have a lot more to deal with at home and school, leading to some wacky shenanigans. Weirdly specific story, I know, but Disney has told it before to good effect. This video is not about turning red, it's about American Dragon Jake Long. Yeah, there was one too many similarities between these two Disney properties for me to gloss over, but I'm not calling Turning Red a ripoff at all. I love it all the same. It's just a funny coincidence that it shared so many elements with a Disney Channel show that was made in the decade it was set, and one that, while flawed, still has some noteworthy qualities and burning ambition. Remember, before Gravity Falls, story arcs in Disney shows were as common as a blue moon, but how come American Dragon didn't immediately pave the way for it? What caused it to become so obscure? This series' creation is credited to Jeff Good, much more of a writer than an animator if you look at his credits. A playwright to be more accurate, usually known for working for the original No Shame Theatre in Iowa in the 90s, though he continues to write the occasional production to this day. Beyond that, he's also credited for writing the pilot of the MTV reality series Undressed. Let me say that again, he wrote a reality show. Obviously, he's a deity. But he's also given his services to some animated series, like Duck Dodgers, Arthur, and Planet Sheen, just to name the more prestigious shows, and has dabbled in books as well, a jack of all trades as you can infer. But he first submitted the idea for American Dragon to Disney in 2002.
You kids have some funky friends.
And while they liked the idea, they assigned writers from some of their other shows at the time, Kim Possible and Fillmore, namely Eddie Guzelian and Matt McGrady, hope I pronounced those right, to further develop the idea for animation. It's also been alleged that around this time, the Disney execs had some adult fan art of some Kim Possible characters, which they showed to Jeff and told him, "This will happen to your show." I don't want to believe that story, but it's the most interesting tidbit about this early production period. Announced in the spring of 2004 and basically ready to air by the fall, Disney Channel decided to air the show Brandy and Mr. Whiskers first, whose first season was produced concurrently with American Dragons. As much as I want media to be released as soon as possible after it's finished, I guess it makes sense why they'd want to spread out the premieres of their two new shows for the season. In some ways, it's for the best that American Dragon Jake Long premiered on January 21st, 2005. Not just so more eyes were on it, but because it coincidentally ran alongside Nickelodeon's Avatar: The Last Airbender, another fantasy action cartoon with Asian influences starring Dante Basco and Mae Whitman in leading roles. This show is coincidence central, I hope I'm making that clear. It went on to have a modest two-season run, ending on September 1st, 2007, but its fans have remained passionate and eager for more. Or these days, just eager for it to be remembered.
Yeah! Bad dudes beware, cause the American Dragon is in the house! Yeah! Yes!
New York City may be a bustling urban world, but it's home to a good chunk of America's mythical creatures living in secrecy, trying to get along or kill each other. Thankfully, they tend to have a human-dragon hybrid to protect them from danger, and the baton is currently being passed from Lao Shi to his grandson, Jake Long, who has a lot to learn about responsibility, and I mean a lot. It's one of the most prevalent themes of the show. That and honesty, because the secrets all get harder to contain, and some big decisions have to be made for who can be trustworthy enough to keep them. This was one of Disney's first attempts at serialized animation, where plot points matter from one episode to the next, so it pays to watch in order. A lot of the characters act very differently in the early episodes than they do in the later ones, and while admittedly some of that comes down to off-center writing, they created a world where everyone's a work in progress, so that's a good starting point. Jake is a hip and with it kid who isn't totally prepared to carry the legacy of the American Dragon, but that's fine as long as he develops at a natural pace, which he clearly does. His colorful lingo also gets toned down gradually, thank the heavens. Lao Shi, the former Chinese dragon, is a firm authority figure with some goofy moments, but it's the right blend so neither aspect feels too forced. He's sometimes on the brink of becoming a clown, but never loses his wisdom, so it's good. Foo Dog is easily my favorite character. He's a talking dog, off to a good start, who's very intimate with the world of magic. On top of being useful as Jake's entry point for many things, he also typically gets the funniest line of any episode. John DiMaggio, stop being so good and give the others a chance for goodness sake. What teen action hero doesn't have at least 2 friends? Trixie's supposed to be the smart one, but their way of making her smart is usually by getting her to nag about something. Not a bad character, but I can kinda see through her. Arthur Spudinsky is like if Ron Stoppable was grown in a lab. He has hidden depths that take a long time to come to the forefront, but he's a bit of a doofus for most of the show. It always seems like Trixie and Spud are the characters the writers fought over the hardest, but they work for the most part, they just aren't the most original. Who's slightly less cliched is Rose, Jake's love interest who's actually his sworn enemy, a member of the dragon-slaying Hunts clan. Not that either one seems to know. Because of her distance from Jake, her character traits take some time to come to the forefront, namely the reasons for her strength and determination, but they're far more worth it than the others. Jake's teacher, Mr. Rockwood, is one of his most direct enemies, an unhinged conspiracy nut obsessed with theories of the magical world, a strong personality and passion that make up for the walking German stereotype moments. Why aren't you going he? He said the German things! Jake's family is an odd bunch. His mother Susan doesn't have a dragon form, but is equal parts supportive and wary of how it affects Jake's life. His father Jonathan hasn't been let in on the family secret and is an innocent square. They're good, but his sister Haley's more contested. A know-it-all and goody two-shoes who's always developing her dragon powers way earlier than Jake. All I'll say is wait for the second season to fix her. She gets a trainer too, Sun Park, the former Korean dragon, so that's your clue she has just as much to learn. The Bradster is a generic jock kid who picks on Jake sometimes, but he's frankly one of the better jerk jocks out there. They managed to make his jokes work well, so it's like the show's telling the younger viewers not to take these sorts of people seriously when they get to high school. Perhaps the most major villain is the Huntsmaster, Rose's mentor and possible murderer of several dragons. For such a dark character, you never get much on who he is personally, but he is good at showing how evil it is to want to destroy an entire culture. On the flip side, the Dark Dragon wants dragons to be the only species in the world. I wish they met, they could bond so well over their love of genocide. The Dark Dragon even ropes a member of the Dragon Council into his ideology, so he's not an empty threat. He means business whenever he's brought up. For now, I'll leave the roll call at the Oracle twins, Kara and Sarah, who have uncontrollable foresight that varies in reliability. They're the sort of characters you immediately want to get more of, and more of you don't, because the roster is already pretty packed and priorities are very clear. These characters have to grow if they and the show are going to survive, but let me tell you how it started, in a very funky way.
Is it dead?
It's still breathing. Breathing fire!
While the concept is tight and the characters are clearly given a lot to learn, anticipating a bright future, the earliest episodes struggle to cultivate a proper identity. The balance between action and comedy is heavily skewered in the latter side, which isn't a bad thing, it just makes the action feel less important. The sense of humor isn't well defined in the first season. It can be anything: toilet humor, innuendo, wordplay, jokes about how dorky teenagers can be. It's a varied pool, but it's yet to feel like they've hit their stride in providing sturdy setups and punchlines. It's one of the bumpiest starts to a TV series I've ever seen, but they begin to find their footing around a third of the way into the run. By this point, the story's moving forward and the status quo begins to change. There are certain sets of episodes that fit into a particular time frame of the series, which tells me they were cautious of how to plan the story arcs out at the very least. It pays to watch the episodes in the order they were produced, not in the order Disney Channel aired them and they're subsequently listed in on Disney+. It's hard to overlook that Season 1 is also a pretty blatant product of its time. It takes heavy influence from fashion and lingo that was trendy in the mid-2000s and well before, sometimes being self-aware, other times coming off as a bit desperate. You don't need to have your character say yo 3 times in a row. 1 is enough, 2 is overkill. The mythical elements are also pretty easy to compare to Harry Potter, which inspired a whole wave of new fantasy media in books and films in the 2000s. This influence can be way too distracting in some places, like the New York subway that leads to the magical realm is basically an American platform 9 3/4. And of course in the second season they introduce a British kid that can perform magic, but back on track. If you can say American Dragon's better than Harry Potter in at least one department, it's not plot hole central. The magical elements are explained to the audience directly rather than stopping at a source of whimsy, which lends the story's firm through lines and resolutions. The results are still mixed, like Counselor Chang getting roped into the Dragon Lord's plan feels undercooked, while the revelations between Jack and Rose are paced and handled incredibly well. Yet as the season goes on and they tone back the humorous elements, it's plain to see that they'd struggle to find their voice. There are good episodes and stories, yes, but the end of the season finale is more of a mood whiplash than they were likely hoping for. It devastates Jake so much that he gets anorexia. Okay, time to talk about the biggest difference between the first and second seasons of American Dragon, and that's the art and animation. The first season's character designs are more rounded and have a few old school flourishes like some 1930s pie eyes, and the movement is mostly TV quality. They do the old action show thing and have a stock animation for Jake's transformation, which is only ever distracting when they use it in the Lilo and Stitch crossover because they look slightly different there. Oh yeah, there was a Lilo and Stitch crossover! Well, this looks like the last time I'm ever going to cover one of these in another series review, so I guess I've got to go out with a bang. Here's an in-depth review of Morpholomew.
Whoa, 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 back that up. Asteroids? Spaceships? The Amdrak show is about saving magical creatures. It's not sci-fi. I'm out of here.
It's okay.
Hey, honey pie. You ready to pucker up for the Bradster?
I sure am.
Jackpot!
Due to having a new batch of directors and creative minds, and being made 2 years after Season 1, Season 2 is most notable, or notorious, for having a very different art style, more angular with very random additions to character designs. Trust them, ruffling up Hayley's pigtails added a lot to her character. There are a few redesigns that I think worked, like I think Foo Dogs is a bit cuter and Spud has more personality, but then there are others like Jake's dragon form turning into a noodle, and the Oracle twins no longer looking identical. You see them again first in the new intro without even realizing it, then when they appear on the show again, it's a shocking reveal. It seems like the budget increased because the background artists occasionally created CGI corridors which look out of place. There was only one of these in Season 1, but they pop up more prominently in 2. You also sometimes get this weird segue where all the main locations in New York are laid out in a map, which I like more in concept than in execution. And as great as the intro is, I'd prefer it if you maybe just, could you please, okay, just stop showing me what happens in the episode before it starts! This all seems like a hasty way to reinvent the show, but trust me, it was a show worth reinventing. Despite all these changes for the sake of changes to the presentation, the writing in Season 2 is a lot better, which is why I'll say I prefer it to the first. The jokes are funnier, the action scenes are more engaging, and they're throwing in some new characters to keep the show fresh. You have the Gorgons from Greek mythology, reimagined as teenage sisters who cause problems at the high school, some younger huntsmen who serve as comic relief, Nigel Thrall, the aforementioned wizard kid, and a British monkey, Bananas, just to name the most essential to the canon. What was more important was the developments made to the main cast. Hayley was fixed overnight. She still has a childish streak, but they make her problems in life more apparent, so you can actually see why she's pressured to do well. Spud's given some surprising revelations that he's actually a genius when he wants to be. He had the occasional bright spot in Season 1, but 2 leaned more into him obfuscating some deeper smarts. They do some ship teasing between him and Trixie, while also developing an arc where he tries to hook up with Stacy, the snobbish cheerleader. And before long, you're gonna find that uphill battle way more interesting than the Trick Spud teasing that's just there for gags. The blossoming relationship between Jake and Rose was given far more attention than either of the others. There's a big will they, won't they question that keeps popping up because it's Rose's sworn duty to slay Jake, and she has to spend as little time with him as possible, always under the watchful eye of the Huntsmaster. Every couple episodes, there's a big setback, followed by some smaller steps forward, then an earth-shattering change. I don't want to spoil it for you if you want to check the show out for yourself, but it results in a big shakeup that's hard to top. And top it they do. In the last couple episodes, they speedrun a lot of developments. It's great to see so many of the characters get happy endings, however, and few other shows are this generous with the amount of important things going on in their concluding stories. 1 or 2 dangling threads are left to hang, but you're going to feel ready for the ending with how much the back half charges you up. With all that said, it's clear they're blazing through all this because they were worried they wouldn't get a 3rd season. To everyone's surprise, they didn't get a 3rd season. I'm just happy with where and how it ended. But I sympathize with the fans who are left hungry. Just 13 more episodes would have made the show feel complete. I'm always an eager beaver for a revival of some sort, but only if it can measure up to these hits. Foo Dog Takes a Walk pits the Shar-Pei against a dog napper. I like dogs, this episode has a lot of dogs, and they get to kick butt and get good homes in the end. I'm happy. Hero of the Hourglass is a great time travel episode, not just for making the most typical setup work in a funny and satisfying way, but also in their wacky attempts to get the feel of 1986 across by inserting old school Mario sound effects like it's the Super Show. It's a hoot. The Academy was as much as we got in terms of Hunt's Clan world building. It's a deep dive into how these kids are trained to slay dragons, making the clan feel a lot bigger and more sinister than you ever expected before. The ski trip has a lot of ski resort humor. Never having seen snow in my life, these jokes feel like exploring an alien landscape. It's where things really start to heat up between Jake and Rose, Rotwood gets into a lot of pain, and Brad hits his stride, so you're here for the characters more than the setting. The penultimate episode, Being Human, sees Jake struggle to cope with balancing his dragon and human responsibilities, so he deliberately gives up the former. It was the right time to do this plot and deliver this message about how important one's talents and skills are. The Hong Kong Longs is a chill, laid-back finale where nothing big or dramatic happens, just the characters exploring the city and taking in the culture. There isn't much to say about it if you haven't seen the other 51 episodes first, so do that. It's a neat and rewarding bow to wrap things up with. My favorite episode is Dreamscape, for having a very fun premise that was explored in great detail with the right setup and intriguing visuals. Don't expect any major plot developments, just a fun time. You can't expect one in these 5 clunkers. Old school training, like Jake, had a lot to learn. It's hard to even remember what happens in this episode since the character interactions and moral explored here are handled much better in later episodes. Feeding Frenzy is pretty annoying, mostly consisting of Jake having to deal with his egomaniac of a cousin who gets more attention than he needs. If they gave him strong qualities, that would have been much better and made the conflict more interesting, but no, we're just watching a brat and a shark mafia. The Love Cruise is a deliberately contrived story that doesn't add much to the Season 2 arc, just as much as it sets things back. At least it has Foo Dog taking self-love to a new level. Adventures in Troll's setting is pretty boring and thin, with a twist that's telegraphed to the audience dang near the beginning of the story, so it's all just waiting to see an obvious twist unfold. My least favorite episode would be the festive special, the Halloween Bash. Because everyone's wearing costumes today, Jake throws a massive party in his dragon form, angering the council. But I'm with them. Halloween costumes are fun, but they're not perfect disguises or anything. He threw his identity in danger, but then they did too with their very suspicious dialogue right in front of a whole crowd of people. These bad episodes aren't awful, but golly gee do they have their contrivances. American Dragon Jake Long has a pretty mixed first season and a very good second season, making it very comparable to Danny Phantom. Only the opposite, if that makes any sense. DP started out very well but got a lot worse by the end, whereas American Dragon has a rough start but improves dramatically as it goes on. It's far from the best show of its kin, but it's a good time if you can put up with some clunk at first. Is there interest in a revival? I sure hope so. I'd like to see these characters again, but maybe not in a 3rd season of the original show. It could really do with a reimagining. There's a lot of potential in this world, and for good reasons as well as bad ones, that is what's going to stick with me. The potential of American Dragon.
Don't go away. Quack Pack will be right back on Toon Disney.
Good morning, USA. I got a feeling that it's gonna be a wonderful day.